Hi, my name is Keith Cooper of Northlight Images, and in the short video I'm going to try and address a question I get asked by a lot of people quite often is, if I were to print my photos, should I get a dye-based printer or a pigment ink-based printer? There are two main sorts of printers, for inkjet printers that is. There are ones that use inks which are predominantly dye-based, and there are ones which use inks which are predominantly pigment-based. Now it happens, if you look at the range of printers available, that all the more expensive ones are pigment ink-based and all the cheaper ones tend to be dye ink-based. Also, the pigment ink ones tend to have more colours. They have more different colour inks, whereas some of the dye-based ones may only even have 4 inks. That's black, cyan, magenta and yellow, and that's it. I've looked at some recent printers, Canon Pro 200 for example, that's an XP 15000. I've got reviews of those, but this is a more general look at, do I want pigment ink or dye-based ink? Is one of them better? Well, first of all, here's a print produced on a glossy metallic style paper. This is done with dye-based inks, and it's rather impressive. It's the Cathedral at Ely, but I'm not sure to what extent I can really show this in a video, but it has a glow and brightness about the colour that you won't ever get with pigment-based inks. Similarly, this picture here is also printed with dye-based inks, and this is on a very glossy paper. And when you look at test prints, and I do a lot of test prints, and I always suggest testing new printers, inks, papers with known test images. I've got lots of them on the Northlight Images website. When I look at this particular test image, which is from the software you get with the i1 display monitor profiler, it's buried away in the installation somewhere, but the images are there. That's really impressive for a glossy print. If I look at a shallow angle, the colour is, there's no what's called gloss differential, so I can't see the ink laying on the surface of the paper. If I look at a similar image printed on pigment ink printer, superficially they're quite similar. This is also on a glossy paper. This is not on the metallic paper, this is just a plain gloss paper. If I look at a shallow angle, I can actually see slight impression of where the ink is laying on the surface of the paper. And that's called gloss differential. You'll never get rid of it. If you want truly glossy photo style prints, sort of that you might do for small snaps, then dye-based printer with a glossy paper wins every time, if you're bothered about this. Now, most of the time I'm not actually bothered about it. What concerns me more is the fact that on archival papers, and these are papers which are designed to last longer, the prints that I produce using the pigment inks will last a lot longer than the dye-based inks. Now, dye-based inks used to have a bit of a reputation of fading in a few years. The current generation from Canon and from Epson really don't do that. So these prints, if they're stored well, are going to last for years. But if I actually want to sell prints, and sell prints at high quality, I want something that I can say is going to last 150 years or so, under good conditions. This is my kitchen. This is not a place to hang prints without protection of them. The damp, the steam, everything else, the light coming in will cause problems with them. So do remember that just because somebody says pigment inks last a long while, that's pigment inks kept under good conditions, not just any old way. So I've said glossy prints look better. Yeah, they do. And also you can get some really nice intense blacks off them. Here's a print using an art type paper, and the black level on this is quite phenomenal for normal prints. You would not get this intensity of black if I printed this on a pigment ink printer. So why are all the pigment ink printers more expensive? Why do they have more inks? Well, it's very difficult to show here, but the pigment ink printers have, in general, on many papers, a much larger gamut. That's a range of colours they can encompass. And certainly if I use a bigger printer than the ones I've tested recently, such as if I look at one of the larger format ones, P5000, Canon Pro 1000, one of the more advanced printers, the range of colours you can get is greater than you can get of dye inks. What you're getting, you're being impressed by the dye inks, is just the brightness of them. The actual colour range is somewhat less. Now, I can show that with a test image and things like that. I can do it with some soft proofing and show that. But it's not really obvious, but it does exist. So the colours I can get off the pigment inks, there are a wider range. They also tend to give smoother gradations because there's more inks as well. But remember, they cost more. So you're paying for this. There's one area where pigment inks with modern printers completely kicks the legs from underneath dye-based prints, and that is black and white. If you're into black and white printing, on almost any paper type, apart from ultra high glossy, pigment inks just look better. They are more neutral. Now, I'm shooting this video with LED halogen replacement lamps. I've got a bit of daylight coming in. I can be fairly certain that as long as I've set the camera up okay, this looks pretty neutral black and white. The problem you can get with dye-based inks, particularly the cheaper printers where they've only got the 4 colours, is that you may get a black and white print that looks black and white in one light, but you take it somewhere else in the room with different lighting, and lo and behold, it's got a greenish tinge to it, or a slightly magenta tinge to it. There's nothing you can do about that. You can correct the magenta tinge for viewing in one lighting, but you take it back into the other lighting and the print comes out a different colour. That's a long-standing problem with dye-based inks. So for black and white, I would pick pigment every time. There's one other area of paper types that makes a difference for pigment inks, and that is printing on Baryta style papers. Now, Baryta style papers, these are fine art papers here, but tend to be quite thick papers. Baryta style papers are designed for pigment inks. They're designed to give something of that darkroom look about them. Although, actually, anyone who ever mentions to you about the darkroom look of prints, ask them to define what they actually mean by it and how much experience they've had in the darkroom. You'll find that people use terms like that and they don't actually mean a great deal. I have my impression of what darkroom look means, and almost everybody else who uses the term will have their own. It's one of those terms that means almost whatever you want it to mean. But anyway, so what we've got, to sum up, we've got dye-based inks printers are cheaper, pigment ink printers are more expensive. Higher end printers tend to use pigment inks, and that's because pigment inks give you a wider range of colour and on some media give you distinctly superior results. They also last a lot longer. So it really comes down to depending on what you want to do. If you want to print black and white and you're serious about your black and white printing, pigment inks, that's the easy one. That's on almost any paper sort. If you want to print bright glossy prints, particularly if you're just doing small prints, dye-based inks can look great. Dye-based inks, incidentally, can look impressive on the right paper. And if I was handing out some prints for a portfolio presentation, just to give people some prints, just to take away for something, and I had the right sorts of image, I'd print them with a dye-based printer. That's because the prints with this glossiness have more immediate punch and impact. That's not always what I want. I certainly don't want it with that. And this one, although we've got a black here, it's a bit, the surface already showing through. It's not ideal. So what I would say is, if you want cheap, go dye-based inks. If you want quality, go for pigment inks. If you want good quality, small images, dye-based, but a good dye-based printer can help. So something like the XP 15000 or the Canon Pro 200. And I'll just leave you with this. This is a card. I was testing cards in printers, and I made some cards over Christmas and for some people's birthdays and other things, and every single card I made, I printed on a dye-based printer. I had several printers here to test. I had a choice of could print on whatever I like. And I picked a dye-based printer because with this paper, which is a sort of luster finish paper, I had some other cards which had a sort of art type paper, and I had some glossy ones. Every single one of them looked better. Now, the difference is this card, in 50 years' time, the inks may have faded. If I'd used pigment inks, they'd probably be absolutely fine. How many cards do you send out that you expect people to keep for 50 to 100 years? Probably not that many. Hence why I picked cards to print on the dye-based printer. So I've written a lot more about aspects of printer use, with a lot more technical details about why you might choose one or over the other. But suffice to say, if I want to make fine art prints, whatever fine art actually means, it's pigment ink. Black and white pigment ink. Other stuff, well, it depends on how much money you want to spend. So there is no simple hard and fast, this is best. It's just about what you want to produce and what you want to spend. So hope that's been of some use. Please do, if you've got any questions, ask away in the comments. There are lots of articles about different printers, and they all cover different types of printing and what they're good for. So if you found this useful, please do consider subscribing to the channel, and thank you very much.